The moment I stepped into the quiet bookstore, I thought I was just killing time while my friend went to grab lunch. I wasn't expecting her. She was standing near the history section, a tall, poised figure with salt and pepper hair loosely pinned back, scanning a worn paperback as if it contained all the secrets of the world. I froze for a second, not because she was beautiful, though she was, but because there was this aura about her, the kind of calm confidence that makes you aware of every small movement you make. My friend's sister, I reminded myself, though the words felt flat and inadequate in my head. I'd met her once before at a crowded family dinner. She had laughed in a way that made you feel like she saw straight through your insides. But this was different. She wasn't looking at me yet, just flipping the page of that old book with deliberate care. I wandered down the aisle, pretending to browse the shelves, but I couldn't keep my eyes off her. There was a quiet intensity in the way she tilted her head, a barely noticeable frown of concentration that made me wonder what she was thinking. My chest tightened, a familiar ache I couldn't explain. Then she looked up. Her gaze caught mine, sharp and steady for a fraction too long. It wasn't flirtation exactly. It was recognition, like she'd noticed me noticing her, and somehow that was dangerous. My fingers brushed against the spine of a book I wasn't interested in, and I could feel my own heartbeat in my throat. "Don't fight this," she whispered. The words barely left her lips, almost drowned by the soft hum of the air conditioner and the faint creak of the old wooden floors. I blinked, caught off guard, certain I'd misheard. She didn't repeat it, didn't smirk or lean closer. She just went back to flipping pages, the corners of her mouth hinting at a smile I couldn't quite place. I wanted to ask her what she meant. I wanted to apologize for what? For existing in her line of sight? For feeling something I wasn't ready to understand. Instead, I nodded slightly, like a fool, and shuffled a few steps down the aisle, pretending to examine a shelf of biographies I had no interest in. The strange electricity between us wasn't the kind you see in movies. There were no fireworks, no dramatic music, just a charged silence, a subtle awareness that something had shifted in the room, and that neither of us could ignore it. My palms itched to reach out, my mind replaying the whispered words over and over, imagining them in every tone she could have used. I caught myself staring again. She was reaching for another book, fingers brushing the edge of the shelf, careful but unintentional. I imagined tracing those lines with my own fingers, ridiculous, impossible thoughts that made my stomach twist. And yet, I couldn't stop. By the time my friend returned, chatting about sandwiches or some joke I didn't hear, I was still standing there, pretending to read the back cover of a book that had long lost meaning. She glanced up again as I turned, and in that fleeting second, it felt like she was laughing at me, not cruelly, but knowingly, like she held some private joke that I was only beginning to understand. I walked out with my friend, the bell above the door jingling, but her whisper stayed behind, echoing in my mind. "Don't fight this." I couldn't stop thinking about it. I couldn't stop thinking about her. And somehow, I had the sinking feeling that this wasn't the last time our paths would cross, or that her words weren't meant just for me. A week later, I found myself helping her carry boxes of old records from the storage room to the front of the bookstore. She had insisted I come along, though I had no idea why. Maybe she wanted the company. Maybe she didn't. I wasn't sure I'd ever know, and that uncertainty was part of the pull. She moved with a quiet precision, sliding a box across the floor instead of lifting it. Her hands were strong but careful, fingers brushing against the cardboard with a subtle grace that made me want to reach out and steady them, even though there was nothing to steady. She noticed my gaze and offered a tight, polite smile, one that didn't reach her eyes completely. "You're not clumsy," she said softly, as if reading the doubt I hadn't spoken. "Just cautious." I laughed, a little awkward, because I wasn't sure if that was a compliment or an observation. "Cautious seems safer," I said. My voice felt small in the high-ceilinged room, echoing slightly. She paused for a moment, staring at the stack of boxes. There was a tension in her shoulders I hadn't noticed before, a slight slump, a fatigue I could almost taste in the warm, dusty air. Her hand brushed against one of the boxes and lingered there, and I thought I caught a flicker of vulnerability, something she hadn't intended to show. "Long day?" I asked, though the words sounded too casual even to me. Her lips pressed together. Long week, she admitted finally, almost a whisper. And then, as if she immediately regretted it, she straightened and lifted the next box. Her voice hardened, polite, careful. Thank you for helping, though. I noticed how her fingers flexed around the edges of the box, the way her eyes squinted slightly when she concentrated, the faint crease of worry at the corners of her mouth. I wanted to say something, anything, that would make her relax. But I didn't. I just followed her lead, moving in rhythm, silently observing. At one point, a box slipped, and she barely caught it. Her hands trembled for a heartbeat. Sorry, she muttered, more to herself than to me. I reached out instinctively, catching it before it could fall, and our hands brushed. She froze, a quick intake of breath, then moved her hand away, almost apologetically. We carried the last box to the counter in silence, our steps sinking without thought. She leaned against the counter, rubbing at her wrist, and I realized she had been holding tension in her body the entire time. I wanted to tell her it was okay to let it go, but the words stuck somewhere behind my throat. Instead, I just looked at her, noticing the subtle lines around her eyes, the quiet way she let herself exhale when she thought no one was watching. There was something fragile and unspoken there, something I wasn't supposed to touch, but couldn't stop noticing. She glanced at me, and for a heartbeat, the careful guard she always held slipped. Her lips curved in a tiny, almost imperceptible smile. It didn't last, but I felt the electricity of it, the pull of something I wasn't supposed to name. And then she whispered, just enough for me to hear, "You shouldn't be here." I didn't move. I didn't respond. I just watched her eyes, and in that stillness, I knew that neither of us could ignore the weight of the space between us, or the quiet energy threading through it. The storm hit just as the bookstore was closing. Rain hammered against the windows, drumming a relentless rhythm that matched the thrum in my chest. She was behind the counter, sorting receipts, her sleeves rolled up, exposing those strong, elegant forearms I'd memorized without meaning to. I was crouched by the floor, stacking a toppled pile of books, pretending to focus, pretending not to notice the way her hair had fallen loose, brushing the nape of her neck. "You didn't have to stay for this," she said, voice low, almost hesitant. The way she avoided my eyes made me want to reach across the counter and hold her gaze until she looked at me properly. I wanted to," I muttered. My throat felt thick, my words heavier than air. She exhaled sharply, a tiny sound that carried more than the words. Then, without looking, she leaned forward to pick up a fallen receipt, and our shoulders brushed. It was fleeting, accidental, but enough to make my heart seize. I froze, half expecting her to pull away, but she didn't. Instead, she lingered for a split second, a pause pregnant with tension neither of us dared to name. The silence stretched. Outside, the rain made the streetlights blur into golden streaks. Inside, the air was warm and smelled faintly of paper and coffee. I wanted to tell her something, anything, that would explain the storm between us. But every word I imagined sounded foolish, inadequate. A sudden vibration on her phone cut through the moment. She glanced at the screen, and I saw her eyes tighten. Someone she didn't want to answer, perhaps. A boyfriend? An ex? Or just someone else she owed attention to? She pressed ignore, sliding the phone back into her pocket. But the brief disruption was enough to remind me that whatever was simmering here wasn't supposed to happen. I crouched a little longer, pretending to be absorbed in the books. I could hear her breathe, soft but deliberate, the rhythm of it pulling at me, making me painfully aware of the space between us. I wanted to lean closer, wanted to bridge that gap with a touch or a word, but I couldn't. I shouldn't. Then she moved behind me, handing me a heavy volume I had almost dropped. Her fingers brushed mine again. This time, it lingered longer, intentional but fleeting, like a question without an answer. My chest throbbed, and for a heartbeat, the storm outside and the quiet inside the bookstore felt like a single, suspended moment. She smiled. A small, almost secretive smile, one that didn't reach her eyes completely but hinted at something unspoken. "Careful," she said, voice low, teasing but not quite playful. The words sounded innocent, but I could feel the weight behind them. I swallowed, nodded, and let my hand linger on the book a second too long, imagining the warmth of hers still there. I wanted to say something, anything, but the right words didn't exist. And then the moment broke, just slightly. She stepped back, adjusting her sleeve, pretending to sort papers. My fingers itched to reach out, to stop her from moving away, but I let her go. The rain hammered harder, lightning flashing outside, and I stood there, frozen, aware that I had been a breath away from crossing some invisible line, some line neither of us were ready to name. I left the bookstore later, rain soaking my jacket, her whispered caution echoing in my mind. The touch, the brush, the pause that felt too long, too intimate. What was that? I kept asking myself as the city blurred past, my thoughts entirely hers. It was late. The bookstore had emptied hours ago, the hum of the neon closed sign painting the room in pale light. I was stacking returns when I noticed her standing by the window, looking out at the street slick with rain. She didn't move, didn't even glance at me. The quiet between us was heavy, not awkward, charged, like the air before a storm. I swallowed, tried to ignore the knot in my stomach. But I couldn't. I stepped closer, feeling the floorboards creak beneath my shoes. "Are you okay?" I asked, unsure what else to say. My voice sounded fragile, and I hated it. She didn't answer at first. Her hands were clasped loosely in front of her, fingers tracing invisible lines on her coat. Finally, she spoke, low, almost to herself. "I don't know what this is," she said. "Why we keep circling around it. Why it feels like something I can't name." I froze. That was honesty. Not the kind I expected, not the kind you read about in books or see in movies. She was speaking her confusion aloud, and it made my chest ache. I started, then stopped. Words wouldn't form. I wanted to tell her I felt the same, that every glance, every brush of our hands, had left me dizzy with something I couldn't define. But saying it out loud would make it real, irreversible. She turned slightly toward me, just enough that I could see her eyes, tired, guarded, but raw in a way that left me exposed. "Are we pretending?" she asked, voice breaking just slightly. "Or are we actually moving towards something we shouldn't even try to understand?" I stepped closer, careful not to cross whatever invisible line still separated us. Her eyes followed me, sharp and searching, and I realized for the first time that this wasn't about romance. Not yet. This was about something older, heavier, something that had been growing in the spaces between us without either of us naming it. The silence stretched. I could hear my own heartbeat, could almost hear hers. I wanted to speak, wanted to reach out and say, "I feel it too," but the words stuck. I could only watch her, tracing the subtle tension in her shoulders, the faint tremor in her hands. She took a deep breath, exhaled slowly, and for a moment, I thought she might turn away. Then she whispered, barely audible, "I'm scared of losing myself if I let this go further." My throat tightened. I nodded slowly, understanding too well. The fear of something forbidden, of wanting someone and not knowing what it would mean if you gave in. The bookstore felt smaller suddenly, the walls pressing close, the books around us witnesses to something neither of us could control. I wanted to reach out, to say it would be okay, to offer some kind of comfort, but I couldn't. I could only stand there, rooted, the weight of her words sinking into me like lead. She turned back to the window, and I watched her shoulders shake just slightly, a quiet, unintentional surrender. The light from the neon sign flickered on her hair, highlighting the streaks of silver, and I felt a pang I couldn't name. And then, almost as if speaking to herself more than me, she whispered, "I don't know if I can survive this if it goes wrong." The words hung in the air, a devastating truth neither of us could escape. I wanted to tell her something, anything, but I only stood there, caught in the gravity of her confession, knowing that nothing would ever feel the same again. I was shelving some returned novels when I noticed her sitting behind the counter, staring at a small, yellowed envelope she'd pulled from a drawer. The rain had eased outside, leaving the streets glistening under the lamplight. She didn't look up when I entered. I hesitated, unsure if I should disturb her. "I found this," she said quietly, finally lifting her eyes. They were soft, distant, but still sharp enough to pin me in place. The envelope was addressed to her in neat, familiar handwriting. She held it as though it were both fragile and dangerous. "Do you want me to?" I started, but she shook her head. "No, I need to see it." Her voice was barely audible, and I stepped back, respecting the space she demanded. I watched her carefully peel it open, unfold the paper inside. The words were faint, looping in a handwriting I didn't recognize at first, until a memory flickered across her eyes. I never really told anyone," she murmured, more to herself than to me. Her fingers trembled as they traced the edges of the paper. He left, just disappeared one day, and I blamed myself for years. I could see it then, the subtle collapse behind her composure, the way her shoulders slumped just slightly, the way she swallowed as if holding back something more. She wasn't acting. She was raw, exposed, and suddenly very human in a way that made my chest tighten. "I didn't know what to do," she continued, voice breaking. "I thought if I just moved forward, ignored it, it would go away. But it never did. I wanted to say something reassuring, but the right words felt impossible. Instead, I walked closer, careful not to crowd her, and sat on the edge of the counter. The silence between us was thick, but not uncomfortable. It was shared, intimate in a way that didn't require conversation. "You remind me," she said suddenly, looking at me with something I couldn't name, "of someone I used to know. Someone I trusted, who made me feel like I could breathe again." The words hit me differently than I expected. It wasn't a comparison. It wasn't a confession. It was a crack in her armor, a quiet acknowledgement that I had touched something in her that was long buried, long protected. I swallowed, heart racing, but I kept my gaze steady, letting her vulnerability sit between us. She folded the letter slowly, placed it back in the envelope, and tucked it into her drawer with meticulous care. Then she exhaled, almost as if she were trying to release a lifetime of tension in a single breath. I reached out, almost unconsciously, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. She didn't flinch. She didn't move closer, either. She just let me, and for a moment, the space between us felt suspended, heavy with unspoken emotion. Her eyes met mine, steady now, and she whispered, barely audible, "I didn't know I could still feel this so suddenly." The words lingered. I didn't respond, didn't need to. I just watched her, feeling the weight of what she had revealed settle over both of us. A small, human confession, and yet it was seismic in the quietest, most undeniable way. I found her in the storage room again, this time sitting on the edge of a worn wooden crate, knees drawn close, hands clasped loosely in her lap. The late afternoon light filtered through the high windows, dust motes floating lazily between us. The air smelled faintly of old paper and polish. "You don't have to say it," I murmured, though my voice trembled slightly. "I already know." She looked up, startled for a moment, then let her gaze settle on me, steady and unguarded. "Know what?" she asked, almost teasing, but there was no humor in her tone. Only honesty, fragile and raw. I moved a few steps closer, careful not to close the distance too quickly. "That whatever this is between us, we can't pretend it isn't." My hands were shoved deep in my pockets, awkwardly, because touching her felt like crossing some invisible line I wasn't ready to define. She exhaled slowly, eyes tracing my face as if memorizing it. "I know," she said softly. "I've known for a long time, really. I just didn't want to admit it, not even to myself." We sat there in silence, the room shrinking around us. There was no dramatic confession, no over-the-top declaration. Just acknowledgement. Quiet, human, real. And in that quiet, I felt the weight of months of longing, tension, and stolen glances settle into something inevitable. Her hand twitched at her side. Without thinking, I reached out. My fingers brushed hers, tentative, almost afraid to anchor the connection, but she didn't pull away. Instead, she let our hands rest together lightly, the touch minimal, yet enough to communicate everything words never could. We didn't speak. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was full, heavy with understanding. Every unspoken thought, every secret glance, Every fleeting moment of tension we'd shared felt present in the small space between us. I realized that this was the moment we had been moving toward, unknowingly, inexorably, all along. Her eyes softened, and she let her head tilt slightly toward mine, though she didn't close the distance fully. It was a gesture of trust, of quiet surrender. I wanted to close the gap, wanted to lean in and say something monumental, but the words felt unnecessary. Everything had already been said in glances, in pauses, in the careful touch of our hands. The room was warm now, sunlight fading to gold, dust dancing in the light. I rested my shoulder against hers just slightly, not pressing, not claiming, just being. And she didn't move. She let me be there. For a moment, time seemed suspended. There was no rush, no pressure, just the slow collapse of walls we had both built. This connection wasn't instantaneous or effortless. It was earned, fragile, tested by hesitation and fear, shaped by months of quiet observation and restraint. And yet, it was undeniable. She exhaled, a soft, almost imperceptible sound, and leaned her forehead just slightly against my shoulder. The gesture was small, intimate, and entirely human. No declarations, no promises, just acknowledgement, just presence. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just let her be there, and let myself be there too. And in that quiet finality, I knew we had crossed some invisible threshold. Something profound had shifted, though nothing had been said. Nothing needed to be. We simply sat there, together. I think about that day often, the one when the quiet between us said more than words ever could. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It was just her and me, sitting in the corner of that old bookstore, hands brushing, shoulders almost touching, realizing that the tension we'd been carrying for months had finally settled into something real. I've never forgotten the way she let herself exhale in my presence, how her eyes softened when she tilted her head just slightly toward mine. That small gesture changed everything. Not because it was a declaration of love, not because it promised a fairy tale ending, but because it was honest. It was human. And for the first time, I understood what slow, careful love could feel like. Not explosive fireworks, but a steady, quiet knowing that someone sees you, really sees you, and lets you exist without fear. She changed too. I can see it now in the way she moves, the way she laughs more freely, the way she pauses sometimes just to take in a moment rather than rush past it. There's softness in her that wasn't there before, a trust she gave me without words. And in giving it, she gave herself permission to feel again. As for me, I learned how much patience could shape desire. I learned that the moments between words, the pauses, the silences, can carry more meaning than any grand gesture. I learned that love doesn't have to announce itself loudly to be real. Sometimes it's just there, quietly steady, waiting to be recognized. We don't rush. We don't demand. We simply exist in this new rhythm, careful not to break what took so long to build. And somehow, that's more than enough. Even now, when I walk past that bookstore, I feel a quiet warmth, a memory that isn't painful or bittersweet. It's luminous, the kind of glow that lingers long after the lights go out. I smile to myself, remembering her whisper, her hand brushing mine, her forehead leaning against my shoulder. All small things, all fleeting, all completely transformative. Life moves forward, of course. Storms come, rain falls, days get busy, but there's always that space between us, invisible but tangible, carrying a steady pulse of understanding, trust, and unspoken affection. I don't know exactly what the future holds, but I do know that those moments changed me forever. And maybe that's what love is at its most honest. Not a rush, not a declaration, not perfection. Just quiet understanding, shared space, and a willingness to let someone matter without trying to control it. If this story made you feel something, let me know in the comments. Would you want more stories like this?